on during this time? God's relationship to a man. God's relationship to a man. The central point is God establishing a covenant with a man through which the Messiah would come. See, God needed permission. He needed permission. What did Satan use?
Deception.
Deception. God used permission. Abraham, get out of your father's country. Leave your family behind. Walk thou before me and be thou perfect. And I will be your shield and your exceeding great reward. And then Abraham said, let's make a covenant. God said, we'll make a covenant. There's an agreement going on. There's an agreement. So, the central point, God establishing the covenant with Abraham through which the Messiah would come. What was Abraham before God called him away? Yeah, I know it's nationality, but what was he? He's what? An idol worshiper. He was a moon worshiper. You ever heard of teraphim? That's after his father. His father was a maker of idols. Teraphim, terracotta in Africa. That's what his father did.
What's the word? Do you have a biblical reference to that?
Joshua chapter 24, verses 1 through 3. Let's turn there real quick. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel, for their heads, and for the judges, and for their officers, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said unto all the people, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood and led him through the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. Okay? The principal characters during this period are Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now, why is it that God had to make a promise to three guys? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why did he have to make the promise to three guys?
Three witnesses. Something has to be ratified in the presence of three witnesses.
Yeah, it was three promises, not before three witnesses. Jacob and Isaac weren't there when God cut the covenant with Abraham. Why did he have to go like that? And you know what? He made the same promise. He made the same promise. What he made to Abraham, he made to Jacob. He made the same thing to Isaac. Why? Because God's initial covenant with Abraham, to thy seed after thee. He had to see it in his grandchildren. That's why Abraham didn't die until after Jacob was born. He had to see how God was going to bless Isaac. God had to prove it to Abraham that I'm keeping my word. And that's why when God is talking, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, that God is the God of the living, not the dead. He let the living man see his descendants. And the descendant, Isaac, saw both sides. He saw the God that promised to his father and the God that kept his promise to his son. That's why in Isaac shall your seed be called. That was important. God had to do it 3 generations, because it was the tradition of men that whatever covenant happened had to exist through their generation of their children. That's why the Bible keeps using the phrases to your children's children. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. I will visit the iniquity of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation. That's the point. God replicates the promise. He replicates the curse, because that was the tradition back then. So the establishment period is God proving that he'll keep his word. That's very important. God proving he'll keep his word. Okay, the next period. The next period is the enslavement period. Basically, that lasted from 1690 BC to 1491 BC. What happened then? That was from the death of Joseph until the 10 plagues. Death of Joseph until the 10 plagues. The highlight is God responding to Israel's needs. God responding to Israel's needs. Central point. Remember before this that Israel was just a little buzz of a tribe bouncing from place to place, 70 people. All right? But the central point of this period is God fulfilling his grace to the Amorites and showing his great power to the world. Why is that so important? Turn to Genesis chapter 15. This is wonderfully prophetic. It's perfectly accurate, and it shows God's power and love. Genesis chapter 15, this is during God's covenant with Abraham. And God gives beautiful type and imagery here. Chapter 15, verses 13 through verse number 16. And he said to Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go down to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come thither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What is God saying? They have not exhausted all their grace. All of their grace has not been exhausted. You know what God is saying? He's saying sometimes his people have to go through tribulation so another people can have grace. Why was Stephen stoned? Where did they throw their coats when they stoned Stephen? Feet of Saul. And God used that as a trigger. Stuck in Saul's heart. And that was the initial thing that God began to use so that he could talk to Saul on the road to Damascus. I tell this story, and it's one of my favorite stories. I say it all the time. I read Christian biographies whenever I can. And one of them is the story of Meg Eddy, who was a midwife in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge. And she went there just after the French had left in 1954. And she was a midwife. She brought young men into the world. She had been there for years. And one night when Ho Chi Minh had started the Khmer Rouge and the purging, that's what it means, started the purging, the door to her hut was knocked down. She had nothing of her former life. She had no toothpaste, no toothbrush, nothing of that stuff. She had given it all away to the sake of the gospel. The door of her hut was knocked down. She was dragged out in the middle of the square, beaten with rifles, jaw crushed with the boot heel of some of the very young men she brought into the world. She knew them by name. She knew their mothers. Some of their mothers were on death's door. She saved them. And they beat her, and then repeatedly, one after one, they jumped on top of her and raped her over and over again. And while she's lying there in the heaving and the sweat and the bleeding, she cries and said, God, why are you letting this happen to me? And she heard a voice audibly say to her, do you love me enough to trust me that I'm doing something with your life that I may never tell you or explain? Do you love me enough to trust me that I'm doing something with your life that you may never understand and I may never explain? See, we've got it really easy. These people for 400 years didn't have a Bible. They didn't have a prophet. They didn't have a church. All they heard was there was a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for 400 years, they were under the boot heel of the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were cruel. The cruelty you cannot imagine. When the Egyptians wanted to have fun, when the Egyptians wanted to have their celebration, they would grab an Israelite and set him on fire, and they would cook on top of it. Because they thought they were nothing. People died all during that time. And why? So God could show the Egyptians grace. And what was the result? Some Egyptians left with Israel. God may be using your life to say, man, why do I go through so much? God may be using your life in a way that you may never understand and he may never explain. You know, I'm sick of the books why bad things happen to good people. Look, first of all, you assume facts, not in evidence. Who said that anybody was good? Who said it? God's for the eternal plan, not the immediate situation. My dear friend, Madge Terrell, found out she had cancer in 11 forms of her body. I went by her house to see her apartment, spend some time with her, cheer her up. That woman blessed me more than I could ever bless her. And I went, Madge, I want to pray for you. I heard what you're going through. I'm sorry. I said, Dwight, forget all that foolishness. She said, let's just pray that I don't waste this. Waste it? What are you talking about? This is all for God's glory. I'm not the issue. It's for God's glory. Are you there yet? Are you there yet?
Yeah.
Paul says, most gladly, therefore, will I suffer. Glory in my tribulations, and my persecution, and my distresses. For when I am weak, then am I strong. Are you there yet? Christian, that's what's going on. God did this so that the Amorites would never have an excuse. Okay. The principal characters during the enslavement period are Moses, Pharaoh, Aaron, and Joshua. Moses, Pharaoh, Aaron, and Joshua. Next period. Anybody guess? Starts with an E. What?
Exodus.
The Exodus period. Very good, Jason. The Exodus period. Can someone hazard a guess and tell me how long they think the Exodus period was? It was at least
40.
At least 40 years. Okay. 1490 BC to 1451 BC. It was from the plagues until the death of Moses. From the plagues until the death of Moses. The highlight was God rescuing and redeeming